Welcome to today's webinar on Google Webmaster Guidelines. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording and the slides that go along with it will be made available on demand on the LawLytics website in the next few days. So if you're thinking about taking notes, there's no need to do so because we'll supply you with all of that information. Today's webinar was scheduled to be presented by Victoria Blute, who is our community manager. Tori's job is to keep our members in the know about the latest legal marketing technology, which includes news and, of course, information about the search engines. To that end, she keeps up with what Google's doing, what's going on there, latest news, and so forth. And I want to start by giving Tori the credit for preparing this webinar. Tori has asked me to present the webinar today because she's out recovering from the flu. And for that reason, we're going to skip the usual question and answer session at the end. However, if you do have questions that come up during the presentation, please add them to the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel. And Tori will address them as the materials, along with the materials that are going to be released when we post the on-demand version. My name is Dan Jaffe. I'm an attorney licensed to practice in Washington State and Arizona, and I'm also the CEO of LawLytics. Before going into legal marketing full-time, I spent about 10 years as a lawyer in private practice, and I built successful law firms in both Seattle and Phoenix. LawLytics was created based on the frustrations that I experienced while growing my own practices online. And it's the legal marketing technology and services that I wished had been available to me while I was practicing. As the full-time CEO of LawLytics, my mission is to demystify legal marketing and make the best practices, technology, and services accessible and readily available to any law firm that wants to secure their future online success. In today's webinar, we'll discuss why Google has guidelines in the first place, which will help law firms see why engaging in certain practices can truly harm law firms' websites, rankings, and traffic. We'll then discuss a basic outline or overview, if you will, of what Google expects from webmasters. And then we'll get into some detailed aspects so that attorneys can know what's a scheme, what to avoid, and what's a best practice when it comes to marketing online and making the search engines and search engine users, for that matter, happy. Let's start by talking about early Google. When Google started in the 1990s, the company set out on a mission to organize the world's information. They decided to build a system based on keywords and links. The idea was nice, but it wasn't fully formed and left room for a lot of early loopholes. The end result of those loopholes was that because this was a keyword and link-based system, people learned how to take advantage of Google to have their websites ranked more highly, even if those websites didn't offer anything that was useful to either the search engine or its users. From that, an industry of black hat SEO or search engine optimization sprouted up. Black hat SEO is basically practices that don't benefit search engines or search engine users, but are instead designed to cheat the search engine system to gain higher rankings in the results. It wasn't long before Google realized this was a problem and started outlining guidelines and implementing algorithms to enforce those guidelines. Today's Google is meant to provide quality content to its users. It has a series of algorithms in place that are constantly busy searching the internet for websites that don't meet their quality standards, and whether that means abusing keywords, links, or otherwise. If you're not convinced that Google's Webmaster Guidelines matter, or that Google has the smarts to spot a black hat SEO trick, consider a blog that Tori wrote in November of last year about a reformed SEO guy. All the way back in 2012, Google was already smart enough to de-index his network of 25,000 blogs that he was working on, which completely destroyed his business. He happened to get lucky and is now working as an inbound marketer, so it didn't totally ruin his career. But as an attorney, especially when you're website and blog is attached to your name and your firm's name, I can't overemphasize the importance of sticking to Google's rules and not trying to bend them at all to get either short-term or long-term gain, because Google is typically smarter than any attorney out there trying to play in Google's playing field, and is certainly smarter than any SEO person that you might hire to try to trick Google. Google brings up 4 main points in their basic guidelines, and we're going to go over those 4 points here. The first is make pages primarily for users, not for the search engines. Adding spam to the web used to be a profitable endeavor, but Google is now too smart for websites designed to get its attention through these kind of schemes. Google wants to provide its users with useful results because really that's what Google's users are looking for. We know that people use search engines for basically 3 main reasons: for shopping, for entertainment, and for research. And if your potential clients are looking up questions and queries based on a case that they have or a problem that they're looking to solve, providing information meant for them as people and not for the search engines will drastically improve attorneys' chances of connecting with those potential clients. Don't deceive your users. Again, this is really about making pages for users rather than the search engines. Users will become frustrated if your web pages come up in the search results, but they fail to provide those users with the information that they expected to find there based on those search results. So even if you could game the search engines, which you really can't anymore, by doing so, doesn't it make more sense to just go ahead and create good content in the first place? Because there's no sense in drawing a visitor to your website if that visitor is just going to get frustrated and leave. Think about what makes your website unique, valuable, and engaging. Make your website stand out from others in your field. This is an area where instead of actively avoiding the don'ts, your law firm can think about what you really should be doing on the web. And what you really should be doing is showing potential clients what makes your firm unique and what makes it valuable and what you can do for them when it comes to solving whatever problem it is that they're currently having. That's what defines Google's basic guidelines. But let's get into some specifics about what Google expects from websites so that your law firm is more likely to be able to determine what actually is a good practice and what might either be dubious or just useless for that matter. You want to avoid tricks intended to improve search engine rankings. And you can really start with the litmus test of asking yourself these questions. Question 1, could I show this to a Google employee? Question 2, does this help the visitors to my website? Does it add anything of value to potential clients, to referral sources, to opposing counsel, to anybody else that might matter as far as a person goes? Next question, would I do this if the search engines didn't exist? So, for example, would I supply this information to my clients and potential clients? If the answer is yes, then by all means, you should be doing it. If the answer is, well, probably not, then it's probably a good idea to take a look at what you're doing and ask, well, why are you doing this specifically because the search engines exist? And there's enough that you can do positively that will fit into the answer of asking or answering these questions correctly, and also giving value. So you're giving value to your potential clients, your referral sources, and the search engines at the same time. Google really wants to drive home the point that any scheme or any trick designed to deceive users and the search engines is a problem. And as for the question, could I show this to a Google employee? We understand that this may be a little vague at this point, but we'll get into some more specifics of do's and don'ts shortly. We know that Google expects websites to provide high quality content for its users, but maybe it's not clear just yet what exactly this means. High quality content is content that's specific, it's useful, it's unique, and it's trustworthy. But let's say you have unique content on one page of your law firm site. Can you use that same content on another page? We'll talk about that here. Here are some of the problems that you can run into with content. So let's take a look first at automatically generated content. If you didn't write the content or have it written uniquely for you, Google probably doesn't want anything to do with it. There are certain exceptions to that, such as quoting statutes and authority around original writing that you've produced. But automatically generated content includes text translated by an automated tool without human review or curation before publishing, content that subs in synonyms but basically leaves the rest of the text the same, text that's generated from RSS feeds or search results, and also stitching or combining content from different web pages if they don't add sufficient additional information to the conversation to add value. Based on what we know about Google's basic expectations, we can see why this causes a problem when there's nothing unique or useful about content. As an aside, to deviate from Tori's notes here a little bit, we've noticed a trend amongst some webmasters of using content that is found elsewhere because they expect or that their clients expect to see a flow of content going through the website, and that really the lowest hanging fruit is to just use a feed from somebody else's website and either post an article in full or in part. And it happens all over the web. It happens to lawyers. We see it happening all the time where people are copying our clients' writing, and when they notice it, we advise them on how to get it taken down. It happened to us recently as well. There was an upstart webmaster guy that was basically copying all of Tori's articles and publishing them on his website. And we did a letter to him, and he immediately complied with taking it down, not only because it was a copyright violation, but also a violation of the Digital Millennial Copyright Act. But the thing that concerned me in seeing that was that this was an individual who was holding himself out as an SEO expert, who was doing something that is clearly antithetical to what Google is looking for, and clearly not useful to him, potentially harmful to us, and just really low-hanging, useless fruit, moving stuff around for no reason. Okay, aside done, back to Tori's program. Let's talk about scrape content. This is another problem for Google. Scrape content is content, and this is just exactly what I was talking about, that's been taken from elsewhere and placed on your website. It usually fails to give proper attribution to the person who wrote the content, whether it's a product of someone knowingly trying to pass it off as their own, or simply ignorance of what Google expects. So back to my story about the guy that we had to do the cease and desist with. He actually did credit Tori, and that's how we noticed it so quickly, because we do searches for our names every once in a while to make sure that people are not copying us or using our names in ways other than is permissible. And the fact that he did give attribution does not make it right. It doesn't change anything. But on the other hand, I don't want to create the impression that you can never quote people. You just, when you're quoting people, you can take direct quotes from their blog, from their websites, and so forth, as long as you cite it, just like you would cite authority in a legal brief, and just make sure that there's a link that goes back to that website so that people can understand where it came from. And the idea is to not just copy the content for the sake of having more content, but to have a little synopsis at the most to show people that there's this additional resource that will add to the knowledge that they're gaining from your website. Let's talk about duplicate content. This one can get a little tricky. The question is, what happens if you have unique content on one page and then copy it to another? Is it still unique? It's not unique by Google's definition. However, Google does recognize that this happens without the intent of being sneaky or deceiving Google in any way. Google defines duplicate content as, quote, substantive blocks of content within or across domains that either completely match other content or are appreciably similar. Mostly, this is not deceptive in origin. However, this is something that can still cause problems for your traffic and ranking, even if you don't mean it. If you're copying pages verbatim and putting them all over your website, here are some examples that you may not have considered that Google will look at as potentially duplicative content. Boilerplate repetition, for example. Imagine a long copyright text at the bottom of every page. Now, sometimes that's necessary, but if you have a couple paragraphs, we've seen this before where people will put in not only the needed disclaimer to establish copyright authority over whatever the content is, and then whatever disclaimers are necessary from the bar or from a fair trade standpoint, but then it's stuffed with a bunch of additional information about the law firm, jurisdictions, areas of practice, and so forth. And this is repeated on every page. That can get dangerous. In this type of situation, Google recommends that webmasters include a brief summary and then a link to a page that provides more detail. If you've noticed, I'm sure, some websites that look like they're very ambitious endeavors, have large menus, and then you go to individual pages and those pages say under construction. Don't publish pages like that until you actually have real content in them. Google users don't like seeing empty pages, and even if you ultimately intend to put content there at some point, if you have to make a placeholder page for some reason, if it needs to fit into your navigation structure to be there, but the content is not quite there, Google recommends that you cause those pages to be what they call no indexed by adding no index tag, so that Google will bypass them in looking for new content and won't index them in the search engines. Doing so won't harm your law firm's website traffic or ranking as a result. It just simply won't index that particular page where that tag exists. If you're a LawLytics customer, there is a checkbox in the advanced SEO tools to add that. Let's talk about thin content. And incidentally, if you do add that, you need to remember after you have added substantive content to that placeholder page to go back in and remove the no index tag. If you forget to do that and you've added substantive content, that page will never get indexed until that tag is removed. So you just simply, in LawLytics, you just go back into the advanced SEO area of that page, uncheck the no index box, and then save the page. Thin content. This is content that doesn't have anything useful or add anything of value to the conversation. Whether it's content that's been scraped from other sites or pages that only contain a few sentences, Google users can't really inform decisions and get questions answered with this type of material. Thin content really struggles to be specific, and usually because it lacks length and it lacks additional insight and value. We have seen lawyers who have hired companies to do blogging for them, and their idea of a blog post is a small paragraph that basically summarizes what really could fit in the headline of a news story, and that's an example of thin content. We've talked a lot about content now, and let's take a look at links and keywords. If Google used to be keyword and linked based, are these features still things that matter to your firm's website today? First, let's discuss link schemes, which are, as they sound, bad. Google defines a link scheme as any link designed to manipulate search engine rankings. Let's get more specific. Link schemes include the exchanging of money for links, or posts that contain links, exchanging goods or services for links, or sending someone to a free product in exchange for them writing about it and including a link. Attorneys may be asking, what if the exchange doesn't involve money? What if it's all scratch your back, you scratch my back type of scenario? Google is very aware of these and definitely frowns upon them. The exchange of any kind of value, whether it's just a mutual promise or whether it's money, equally bad. Google also includes excessive link exchanges or partner pages that are meant solely for cross-linking in that category. And so, we've seen a lot of attorneys' websites that we have imported into LawLytics that still have remnants of, or still had before we imported them and cleaned it up, remnants of link exchange pages and so forth. And if you have anything like that on your website, you should get rid of it immediately because it doesn't help. We see a lot of dubious link requests come through to our clients. And oftentimes we're asked about them, and our spam filters do catch a lot of them as well. Here's how one very common one is designed, and it's a couple firms that are really highly targeted at highly targeting law firms, I should say, that are asking for these, and these should be avoided like the plague. So it goes something like this: the attorney gets an email, or the form is filled out on their website, and it says, "Look, I am a webmaster, and I represent other attorneys, and I'm trying to build their practices. If you will agree to put a link to attorney A, who I represent, on your website to help with their search engine rankings, then we will provide you with a link back to your website on attorney B's website, so that there's no direct exchange of linking." And for some reason, the companies that do this still think that this is an acceptable practice. I want to disavow you of that notion, and I want to say that if you fall for that trick, whether you're a LawLytics member or not, you will not be doing yourself any favors. You will probably be hurting the attorneys who those types of webmasters are representing as well, and you'll be setting everybody up for failure. So the best thing to do when you get an email like that is to delete it. To think that Google, with all of their PhD engineers, wouldn't be able to outsmart some self-proclaimed SEO guy trying to trick Google by basically doing a zigzag linking type scenario is ludicrous. And so please, whatever you do, don't fall for that. It's not worth it. It will hurt you sooner or later. Hidden text and links that are not visible are another area that Google has focused on. So for example, if you are using white text on a white background filled with keywords, Google's gonna find it, even if your website visitors can't see it. This also includes text that is set to a font size of 0 or so small that the human eye isn't going to be able to notice it. For those who may be tempted to stick a link in an inconspicuous place, such as a hyphen or a period, don't. Google's looking for that as well. Really, the basic premise is links should only be used when you are trying to add value to your user's experience. And I'm not just talking about links within your website. I'm talking about links that go elsewhere as well. So anything else is going to likely be for the purposes of search engine optimization or enhancement. It is a black hat tactic. Don't do it. Let's talk about keywords for a moment, and specifically keyword stuffing. This is an outdated practice that Google has really cracked down on, and yet, unfortunately, there are still webmasters selling services to attorneys who continue to do it. Keyword stuffing involves filling websites with keywords in an attempt to manipulate the search engines. Whether it's keywords that appear in a list or group separated by commas in the header or the footer of the site, or just show up far too many times in a paragraph. For example, Bob Smith is an aggressive bankruptcy lawyer who practices bankruptcy law in bankruptcy court. If you are looking for a bankruptcy attorney, Bob is the bankruptcy attorney for you. Something like that. It's obviously pandering to those keywords, and you just shouldn't do it. And so that goes for keywords that are focused on attorneys, that are focused on jurisdictions, cities, states, and so forth. Just don't do it. Google is constantly creating updates designed to hunt down this type of thing, both links and keywords that are being misused, and stamp them out. There are a few more aspects that Tori wants me to cover that don't quite fit into the last two categories, but are still worth thinking about for law firms. Cloaking is unfortunately still an issue. Cloaking is a sneaky practice in which one gives a page of HTML, so website text, to search engines, while giving them an image or a flash, while providing an image or some kind of flash object to human visitors. So in other words, showing the search engines one thing, showing human visitors something completely different. This also includes the insertion of text and keywords into a page where the user agent requesting such a page is a search engine. So the user agent is basically, is it a human using a browser, is it a search engine, and so forth. And so if it sees that it's a search engine, it serves one thing. If it sees it's likely a human, it serves something else. This is a terrible practice. This was getting lawyers and companies that were doing marketing for them banned 14 years ago. There's just no excuse for anything like this to happen today. And if it even remotely smells like a cloaking page, it makes sense to run. And if you happen to have those on your website, or you've had them in the past, you really need to look at making sure that it's completely cleaned up and that there's no residual negative impact from them. Creating pages with malicious behavior isn't something that most attorneys would think of to do themselves, but it's really worth looking out for rather than blindly trusting, because it does still happen. As defined by Google, malicious behavior includes any of the following. 1, changing or manipulating the location of content on a page, so that when a user thinks they're clicking on a particular link or button, the click is actually registering on a different part of the page. This is completely distinct from responsive web design, which Google prefers. Responsive web design basically has the content rearranging as the browser, the available screen area rather, changes, and it's completely different from what we're talking about here. It's just, when you click on one thing, you think you're getting it, you should actually get it as a human user, and that's the test for that. Point 2 is injecting new ads or pop-ups on pages, or swapping out existing ads on a web page with different ads, or promoting or installing software that does. Point 3, including unwanted files in a download that the user didn't request. Point 4, installing malicious malware, trojans, spyware, ads, or viruses on the user's computer. And last point, changing a user's browser's homepage or search preferences without the user's informed consent. Used to see this a lot more. You don't see it happen very often. And it doesn't happen very often because search engines like Google are more aware of it, and it doesn't make sense for people to do it as much anymore because their sites won't get found if that happens. So trustworthiness is important to Google and its users, and therefore it should be important to you and your law firm as well. And if you've hired someone else to handle your marketing and there's been a major drop in your rankings, it's possible that something else is going on that needs to be examined more thoroughly. Now, I know we've talked about, and we're getting towards the end here, I know we've talked a lot about what you shouldn't do in today's presentation. But even easier than worrying about all of the things that you need to avoid is to simply abide by what Google really wants, and that's the production of high quality content. Writing high quality content is honest. And by doing so, you can avoid the worrying about the little aspects of Google's guidelines because by definition, it's exactly what Google wants for its index and also for its human users. Let's talk about hacking for a moment. Trustworthiness is important to Google and its users, and therefore it should be important to law firms as well. If you are using shared hosting, especially value type hosting, if you're using open source software, your site may be more vulnerable to hacking. And so it's a good idea to keep an eye on that very closely. It's a very good idea to log the changes that you've made if you're working on your own website, or if somebody else is working on your website for you. Have them log the changes. What did they put on there? What if they're, if I can't convince you not to go have somebody get links for you, at least have them keep track of what links they're trying to get for you. Although I would sooner recommend firing that guy or even paying them not to get links for you rather than paying them to get links for you. But the point is keep a journal of what's going on your website so that you'll be able to readily see if something is hacked. Because, for example, hackers get in there and, the obvious thing that they do is display malicious messages. For example, my website got hacked back in 2002 or 2003. I was using, I think, a WordPress website at the time or some other open source, and they posted something that was, blatantly obvious on the front page, and so I knew right away. And it took me a few minutes to restore the backup. Found out what the security hole was, fixed that, and it was done. But more malicious than that even is hackers that get into your website and post links to things that they want to promote. Typically, it's not going to be links to anything that's relevant from your website. So, you might find that all of a sudden you have hundreds or even thousands of pages on your site that talk about Viagra and Cialis and other types of prescription drugs that you might want to get online, about gambling, about pornography, and about things that obviously aren't related. But there's also this underbelly that actually tries to do something more legitimate in the eyes of search engines by hacking into your website. And what that is if you have an attorney website and you've got some great content on there, but you start noticing links to competitors or links to attorneys that you've never heard of, within the content of your site. That's something that may have been there for a while. It may be something that can get slipped in, and you need to be very aware of that, because it's done for profit by those webmasters to boost the ranking of their clients. Obviously, it's something that shouldn't be done. It can hurt you in the long run. And it can also just divert, it can hurt you with the search engines, that is, but it can also divert visitors and potential clients from your website to places that you'd rather not have them be, other than your website. And then finally, actually, two more points. Make sure that your website is backed up. If you're on LawLytics, you do not need to worry about that. We take a daily backup. We have archives of your website. If it ever needs to be restored, it can easily be done just by submitting a support request. And we also have a lot of security measures. We're constantly monitoring for those kind of attacks. And we have a closed system so that we don't have to worry about it. But if you're on other systems, for example, if you have a WordPress site, you want to make sure that you're creating backups regularly. Those backups are in a secure place, and that you have an incremental record of those backups, because you might not notice if your site has been hacked and small changes are being made over time. And so it might be necessary to go back in and restore content from various points in time. Last is user-generated spam. This includes spammy comments on your blog, as an example. So, and this is so common. It used to be even more common. But if you have a blog post and you get a comment like, "This is a nice, well-written post. Thanks a lot for doing this. Keep up the good work. I will read your website often." And then there's a link back to some other attorney's website. Don't approve that. If you're a LawLytics member, you have the ability to approve all comments on your blog or blogs before they go live. Those are types of comments that are blatantly geared to gaming the search engines. I wouldn't, as an attorney and gatekeeper of my own law firm's blog, I would not disallow every post that has a link. For example, if I'm writing about some substantive area of law and another attorney gets on there and says, "These are great points. It's interesting that you've taken this approach in this jurisdiction. Here's how this is approached in my jurisdiction. I've written a blog post that also discusses this. Here are some of the differences. And if you want to learn more about that or comment on it, here's a link to that blog post." Those are actually good. They add to the conversation. That's what the LawLytics network is all about. But you really want to be cognizant that not all activity on your website or blog is good activity, and that anywhere there's a form on your website, whether it's a contact form for new clients or whether it's a blog comment form or anything else for that matter, it's a place where malicious actors can try to get in to get information either to you or get it posted on your site to other people. Like most things worth doing, marketing your firm online is worth doing well. There are no shortcuts or tricks that will provide as good of a return on investment as the time, the effort, or the money that you invest in creating good content for your site. And the thought and effort that you put into keeping those who would try to take shortcuts on your behalf away from your web presence is also a very solid investment and use of your time. If you have questions or concerns about anything that you're currently doing on your website or that is being done on your behalf, or about anything done on your website in the past that might potentially be the cause of problems now or in the future, at LawLytics, we're happy to do an analysis of your web presence and tell you what we see and what we recommend. If you're a LawLytics member and thinking about doing something that you suspect might be outside of Google's guidelines, or you're thinking about working with somebody that calls you offering SEO services, and you think that they might be doing something that doesn't quite smell right, we're always happy to take a look and give you our opinion. So anytime you have questions about stuff like that, just let us know. I want to thank Tori again for preparing the webinar material, and wish her a speedy recovery. And I want to thank each of you for attending this webinar today. And as always, please let us know what we can do to help you. Take care and have a great day.